Natalie, awesome to have you on. And when I was getting the marketing out for this event, letting folks know what we were doing, I was telling everybody, I can't believe that I nailed you down to get you on the show because of your busy schedule.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so what I want to do is I want to start, if you could tell us, our audience here, we've got a lot of people logging on. If you could tell us a little bit about your background. You're in high demand. You're all over the place. I mean, you've got, you're on all these media outlets. People want to hear what you're saying. So tell us a little bit about your background, very brief, and what you're doing, what's in demand here, and then let's jump into what you're talking about, what's resonating with entrepreneurs across the country.
Sure. So my story is really simple. I knew I wanted to become a lawyer at an age because, hi, Leslie, because, how are you? I had a terrible, terrible accident at 15 years old that left me in a wheelchair, an entire half body broken, and I wasn't given any justice. The guy had a $25,000 insurance policy and no other assets. And I said, this cannot be the law. This cannot be okay. So thereafter, I became a lawyer at 23 years old to fight for protection. And soon thereafter, I realized that there's not so much justice in the court systems. And when you step into court, you've already lost. So I decided to commit my legal career to educating people on how to stay out of court and protect their assets. And that's what I do.
So what does that mean? So tell us and that's an incredible story, but when you're traveling around and speaking, and hi, Leslie, it's great to have you on.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Natalie, when you're speaking, what are you getting into? What are you educating your entrepreneurs about?
Sure. So it's very simple. There are a few small steps that we can all take that are not so expensive, not so time consuming, that protect us. What do I mean? Proper titling of the things that you own. So for example, I can own, my home as Natalie Elisha Gold. However, that gives it no protection. God forbid, should I do something and get in a car accident, hurt someone, God forbid, or do anything that can cause an issue, now all my assets are up for grabs. If though I put them in what I call the circle of trust, where often I'll hold hands with my clients and say, we're holding our circle. The circle gives an invisible layer blessed by the law to allow you to protect that same asset just because of a little tweak on the deed that says it's owned in trust. Amazing.
Right. Yeah. So, obviously we're an asset protection firm and, we're highly integrated with you and things you're doing. And, we often let folks know there's 40 million lawsuits filed every year. So when you're traveling around and you're talking about wealth preservation, you're talking about really taking control of your life, your business, and making sure your planning's pulled together.
Absolutely. In my most recent book, Money Mama, everyone loves the cover, inspired by my now 9-month-old daughter, I educate women especially how to do this because the truth is 9 out of 10 of us are going to survive our spouse, and yet almost none of us have any financial education. So we need to change that. It's an epidemic, and women certainly need to empower themselves on what is going on to protect their nest egg for their life and for their children.
Women and others about that. Are you looking at big picture stuff? Are you counseling them to get sort of a template in place with their overall planning, and what pieces are you touching on?
So the basics are a will, power of attorney, and healthcare proxy. These things do not intrinsically give you asset protection. What they do give you is peace of mind that you have a plan going forward in the event of death or disability. Then if you really want to get asset protection during your life, which I highly advise, you want to layer up different things on top of what you own to make it harder for a creditor to find it. And it's all ethical and legal as long as there's not already an issue going on. For example, LLCs, trusts, These are all legal fantasies, essentially, but the government has blessed them to allow us to protect our money as a result of having these things in place. Now, it's also really advisable to have, some life insurance, especially if you have a mortgage, and especially if you have young kids, because not only is that money growing for you and guaranteed to pay out your kids, it's also an asset protected vehicle, which is so nice, because even in a divorce, your divorcing spouse, if they're not named as a beneficiary in certain states, cannot get that money. So that is an asset that absolutely gives, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Right.
And we hope that we never have to cash in on a policy before our time, but if that should happen, we want to have it as a protection vehicle.
Right. Yeah. No. And there you bring up some interesting things about women living longer, and especially women who own a business, have family. They're going to be the ones in the family at the end making the decisions about how things play out, because their spouse won't be around in most cases. But I want to get into that in a minute. But I want to bring Leslie into the discussion. Leslie, you can obviously hear what we're talking about here.
I hear everything.
Yeah, and Leslie, so what I want to do is, you're, like Natalie, you're all over the place. Before you got on, I was telling people, it's unbelievable that I got you both on the show here, because I know how busy you are. But tell us a little bit about your background very briefly, and then how you're getting involved with owners and others in your area of expertise, and how it all connects.
So my background is that I have been a financial attorney for over 20 years. I started out as in-house counsel to a national debt company, and then I branched out, started my own law practice, recognizing that it was a very much a growing field, but an area where it was devoid of experts who understood individual and business owners' financial related issues as it relates to debt, finances, alternatives to bankruptcy, and certainly a part of asset preservation and protection. So I started my practice over 20 years ago, and it's grown tremendously over the years, and now we have many offices and have serviced many clients who are really focused on trying to resolve outstanding financial issues. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so your clients, are they mostly business owners, families? Is it everybody? And then get into a bit about what are the challenges you're seeing? What are the financial issues? Are they just have massive debt, they're trying to get out of it, or they're managing debt and it's hurting the business? What are the issues?
So my clients run the gamut of it, from individuals who are in their 20s to people who are in their 80s and 90s and everything in between, from Wall Street people to doctors, accountants, lawyers, teachers, police officers, everything. Debt is not discriminatory. So it's anybody who is in a situation where they are financially feeling like they're struggling. I service and work with many business owners, and that can include multi-million-dollar companies and the small business owner as well. And the main issue that they're facing really is it's a financial issue related to managing cash flow and managing debt as a result of cash flow issues. So the reason why people get into debt is because they're borrowing as a result of not having the requisite funds to cover whatever expenses they want to cover. That could include an investment. It can include expansion of a business. It can include whatever, student loans. It can include so many different pieces of that puzzle of where the money comes from and why they're borrowing. The issue then becomes cash flow. So something happens in the business, either their receivables are slow, they didn't get the job they thought they were going to get, they're not being paid quickly enough, they just they expanded too quickly, or on an individual basis, they just have more expenses going out of their household than coming in. And as a result, now they're getting a little bit jammed where the debt is growing exponentially. So they come to me and they say, Leslie, I have this problem. I'm not behind on my payments. I can't not pay my bills. I can pay my bills. What do I do about the debt that we have? I have a company that has $400,000 in debt. This is how the debt is. It's in credit cards, it's in loans and lines of credit. It's guaranteed by this partner and that partner. How do we manage it? Or in a smaller individual basis, in my household, my wife has debt, I have debt, we have student loans, our kids are going to be going off to college in the next few years, and we just, we're paying the bills, but we're just not getting anywhere. How do we manage something like that? So That's really the issue that my clients face.
And so very interesting. And so on the debt side with your clients that own a business, are you at the point where they've got creditors coming after them? Is that ever going on? Or this is before that happens and you're trying to help them make sure that doesn't happen?
So that sometimes happens where they've come to me where they have either a judgment against them or creditors are coming after them. But as a general rule, most people come to me when creditors are not coming after them. They're making the payments. So creditors don't mind. As long as you make the payments, creditors are totally fine with you making the minimum payment for the rest of your life. So they're not going to come after you if you're making the payment. So, but the client is experiencing a situation of pain. So there's not enough cash flow. They may be making the payments and the creditors aren't bothering them, but the balance of those accounts is not going down, and they don't have the requisite cash flow to do other things, either make other investments, they've been turned down for other loans, there's not enough cash to have cash flow left over to go, let's say, go on vacation, do repairs to their homes, invest in other businesses. It's just not, the money just isn't there.
So are you talking to them about restructuring the debt? Does that come up?
Yep. It's all restructuring. Everything that we are doing is restructuring on a different level. So while we don't file bankruptcy and we help people stay out of bankruptcy, which gives them much more flexibility and control over their financial situation and clearly doesn't have as far-reaching effects, what we are doing is restructuring the debt. We're either consolidating it into one payment and then we're negotiating settlements with the creditor. We might be restructuring a full repayment with interest-free, getting rid of the interest. We might be reducing the principal balances. So let's say, hypothetically, somebody owes $100,000. We're reducing that principal owed to half or less, and then restructuring the payments interest-free over a course of time to make it affordable so that not only can they make those debt payments and pay it off, but now there's cash flow. And then, of course, as far as the asset preservation piece, most clients are homeowners, most clients have businesses or other properties or investments. So we're making sure that while we're restructuring and that we're managing the debt, that creditors are not going after their assets.
Well, and I want to ask you about this because, and then I'm going to, Natalie, work you in here because I think there's an overlap there. But so, as an asset protection firm, we see, and our experts, and this just came up in a workshop we just did, where these business owners, for instance, franchise owners that will sign personal guarantees to expand the business. And then if the new franchise doesn't do so well, we've had cases where, the loan is called and they're coming after, the franchisee owner, and, it's tearing apart everything. It's tearing apart the guy's family, and you're, trying to get other assets. So, so your scenario of helping people before it gets to that point really is a pairing with asset protection, preventing that scenario from happening and them getting attacked. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That's a fair way to describe it. So we have a prevention piece, but we also have a piece where we're dealing with the client. In your case, we've dealt with a number of franchise owners that have failed franchises, and then they're coming after them personally. Every single business loan is personally guaranteed. And today we're seeing a lot of merchant accounts where the merchant is taking on what they would consider a loan, but the lender doesn't consider it a loan. It's really an inventory advance, so that the lender gets around the banking laws. So in those cases, yes, they've signed personal guarantees and in many cases confessions of judgment, where now they don't have to go through the court process. They can bypass the legal system and simply have a judgment against them and now start to execute on that judgment, where they're taking assets, they're placing liens against properties, they're trying to foreclose, and that's part of not only the personal guarantee. So understand, on the personal guarantee, everything is personally guaranteed. A credit card is personally guaranteed, cars are personally guaranteed, franchise agreements are personally guaranteed. The problem is that when the individual who's signing the personal guarantee, they want the item so badly, they're willing to sign whatever it is, and the terms in there that are not favorable upon default in order to gain what they want to gain, hoping that the risk that they're taking is going to pay off.
Right,
but when that risk does not pay off, that all the cards fall, and now their spouse is involved, their personal assets are involved, accounts are frozen. So yeah, so there's a preservation piece that we can work on, and a protection piece early on if the client comes to us early. But I'll be frank with you, most people don't come to me early enough. Most people are coming to me later in the game when the cars are starting to fall and things are shaking and they're saying, uh-oh, now what do I do? Leslie, I need your help. It would be fabulous if I could get to these people ahead of time and say, hey, do you know what you're signing? And the effects of what you're signing. It's the same thing in the student loan world. They want to go to college. They don't really care that it costs $60,000 a year and that they won't earn, $250,000 over the course of the first 10 years of their career because they've chosen something, like social work, which is a great field, but only pays $40,000 a year. Right. So therefore they can't pay it. It's the same, that scenario and thought process is no different than those business owners who are taking on, hey, let me take on this franchise. It looks like a successful business opportunity, and many times it is, but what happens in case of default? That's where they should come to me, but let's be realistic. Most people don't come until they need me. Right,
yeah, it's a hair on fire situation,
Right, the barn's on. We call it the barn's on fire. The barn's on fire, and they want me to come in and save every single animal in there. Every animal's got to come out unscathed.
Get the horse out. Get the horse out.
The chickens. They want me to get the chickens and the mice out. So I got to get everything out, and then I get it out, and they lose a chicken, and they're like, "How come I lost the chicken?"
Right. Damn it, I lost the chickens. Well,
I want to know, Leslie, are those chickens laying organic eggs? Because in New York and California, we're all obsessed with the
organic. But I can't. What happens behind the scenes and how that farm started, I can't tell you. But we do a good job of putting out fires for sure. And the truth is that most of the time people come to me and everything is on fire and they're so worried about saving their assets. What do I do about my house and my income and my retirement and everything like that? How do I save all this now from all these creditors or prevent creditors from going after it? So, there is a big piece of asset preservation that we work on when people are in debt, and we try, and debt comes from a lot of reasons: divorce, death. One spouse very often doesn't realize the other spouse put them in debt and they passed away, or they discovered it, or you have elderly people who in early stages of dementia unfortunately start to do things that characteristically they wouldn't have done in the past, so they end up in debt. The children don't know that's happening because the parents are older and aren't sharing that information, but that's a way to debt. Personal injury, loss of job, all kinds of situations can lead to death or issues. Partnerships, we deal with partnerships where one partner didn't know that the other one had gone out and taken a number of loans and placed liens against assets. So many different scenarios. I always tell people, from my perspective, in a debt situation, we are like doctors. We are completely non-judgmental. How you got into it, I can help the thought process so that it doesn't happen again, and making good financial decisions. And I so wish people came to me early on, because I can work through things early on, but it's just not human nature. It's not an expectation.
No, people are reactionary. Well, and so, Natalie, I was going to ask you, because this is fascinating. There's so many subtopics here. Like you mentioned, Leslie, you just mentioned business partner liability, that these partners are exposed to each other's liability. So let me ask you this, Natalie, if the two of you, because there's so much crossover, let's say the two of you are in a room with a business owner, and you're both talking about preservation coming early. How would you two work together? How would you two be a team, and what would you be talking about and counseling them to do ahead of time and avoid these mistakes? Sure. So yeah, think of it as a team.
I think it's a beautiful thing, and I love Leslie, and here's why. Because what she's saying is exactly on point. If they come early enough, I think it's not when people already have the business partnership that's going wrong, because then you're in the save the barn mode. But it's before. It's really counseling individuals and businesses before they take on these liabilities and loans, and explaining to them what can happen. So it all goes back to proper planning. Now, here's the thing that Leslie hit on that I really wanted to talk about too. The student loan epidemic is insane. And the millennials, who's my peer group, my first book was called The Millennials Guide to the Universe. And it gets me on a lot of college campuses speaking about the best way to stay out of debt is not to ever take any on.
But how do you do that? If college is so expensive, how do you do that?
making better decisions.
I'll answer that as far as the student loan piece. The truth is that and this is where Natalie comes in, it's the planning process. The reality is it's the planning ahead of time. Most kids don't want to listen to that. And I have 3 children and 2 stepchildren in college right now. So I understand the cost of school, but I also understand that it's an investment. And if you look at it like an investment and you think about it, what's it going to cost me to go? Do I want to go to graduate school? And does this investment, will the investment pay off? So it's a planning process. And if you can get into the parents' heads, and part of the problem is that if the parents are not on board, and they're on board with, well, my kid wants to go to an out-of-state school, I'm going to figure out how to pay for it, it doesn't matter. But then you're going to complain that you have debt and you have a problem and you can't pay it. The truth is, if you know ahead of time and you're going to make a conscious decision to take on debt that you cannot afford to repay, then you're going to end up in that situation. And the truth is, a 17-year-old, and when my kids were 17, 16, even 18, even now at 21, they don't really care about the debt. Right. They don't care. They want to go to that school they've been marketed to. They think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. They don't want to go to the schools where it could be reasonable. And the parent has to play a role in that, and that's the planning process and understanding financially what you could do and not do. And that's where Natalie and I come in together. I understand from the back end what can happen to you as a result of debt problems. Natalie is the front end planning end, what you could do financially to protect your assets so that you don't end up with problems, but also so that you're thinking straight. And that's where Natalie and I come in from really good angles. I totally understand what happens when people take on student loan debt. I have friends who call me regularly. I have my own kids, but I don't necessarily think that taking on student loan is a bad thing. In fact, 3 of my children have taken the federal student loan. And the reason why I had them take the federal loan is because I put them into a repayment on it, so it would impact their credit positively. And it's being set up properly so that it gets paid back by the time they graduate. So they're not going to end up in debt when they graduate, but they have taken on a debt in their name that gets repaid that can then positively impact their credit and their future. So you can use student loans to your benefit if you're smart about it, and you can set it up properly. The problem is that student loans are used improperly to pay for things that, I know kids who have taken extra student loans for vacations, that, for partying, and it happens. And
You're kidding. I've never heard of that.
But it happens. So, you have to understand that that's what's going on.
Absolutely. And I think to Leslie's point, look, she is a master in this and her kids are so blessed to have someone structure that. But so many students don't have that and need to listen to this more. And here's one more thing. So Paul, in the Millennials Guide, I often talk about, I did college in 2 years with a double major. And I will say this, I can guarantee that any student that I get by their freshman year, I can show them how to do it in 3.
You got out of college in 2 years?
Yes.
And you could, and I can tell you that's a fact because of my own children. I have one of my stepchildren, he can finish in 3 years. So my another one of the kids could also finish early, but he's choosing not to finish early on his own. And my position is, I'm willing to pay for X amount of years. After that, you're on your own. But you can absolutely finish college. All these kids, many of these kids, have AP classes from high school that carry over. There are winter sessions, summer sessions. There are all kinds of opportunities. There are, one of my stepsons is doing a program where he volunteers, but he gets credit for it. So as a result of that volunteering within the school environment, he's able to get almost 12 credits over the course of his years. That's an entire semester that he's going to be done early. So Natalie's completely correct. It can be done early. The difference is, like, I have another one of my children who loves the college experience and doesn't want to leave early. So that's a choice and a decision, but there's a financial impact to it, and that's what the kids don't understand, and that's what parents are most willing to pay for. But if you're not willing to pay for it and you set up structure and boundaries with the kids and saying, I'm not willing to pay for it, there's a limitation because, as anybody knows with student loans, the kids can't get all that money. The parents have to sign for it. So if you're unwilling to sign for it, then they can't get the money. It's not a free-for-all for kids.
Right. And when parents co-sign on a loan for the kid, who's ultimately responsible for that? Is it the parents? Does it affect both credit of parents and kids?
Yeah, both the parent, whoever signed for it. So it's not just parents. I have grandparents, aunts, cousins. I have significant others of people who co-sign these loans. Every single co-signer is financially responsible for that student loan or any loan. So if the student defaults, that will impact the co-signer. And what ends up happening is the co-signer is usually older and has better credit, and therefore they don't want that to happen, so they start paying it. I've had people disappear and the co-signer is paying for it. I mean, all different kinds of scenarios, but yes, 100%, the co-signer is 100% responsible for anything that happens to that loan.
So when you're talking to owners, for example, how does, like, Natalie, I mean, how are you preparing them for the business? Like, how does poor planning kill the business? What are you seeing a lot of? And then what are you telling people from the start? Okay, do it this way. You know, what comment on that a little bit.
Sure. Business partnership is a marriage. And you have to be understanding of what can happen if the partner that you want to partner with, you end up in a divorce. Because often people who are starting businesses sometimes pay more attention and give more time to that business than to their actual family. They're personal guaranteeing loans for the business and putting their family at risk. So the number one thing that I tell my people is very simple. Surround yourself with good people. And if you should have any question, any intuitive sense whatsoever that the person that you're going in business with will not work out, run for the hills. Because that business partner can be the first one coming after your assets. Second, it's beyond the partnership. Let's say you have an amazing partner, they're blessed, fantastic. That entity can soon transform from the American dream to the American nightmare if not properly protected in the right entities. If you're doing a sole proprietorship or you're putting things in your own name and signing in your own name and guaranteeing these things, they are your liability. If the business goes kaput, they still exist.
Right. Is it true that if you own something with somebody else, so business partners, let's say it's a closely held company and it's an S corporation, they own stock together in that company, let's say it's 50-50, is it true that you are exposed to your business partner's liability? So let's say, you know, your business partner's spouse has some issue going, they have a debt issue. And, you know, they didn't get to Leslie in time, so they have creditor coming after them, or they get in a car accident, you own stock together. Aren't you exposed to your partner's liabilities?
Not his wife, though.
Not his wife.
Not his wife, if not the partner's wife, if it's or spouse, if they're not a part of the business and they have a credit card debt. That credit card debt is different than a regular loan. The creditor from a credit card debt will not go after the spouse unless that spouse is not an authorized user, but they'd have to have co-joined when they signed up for the debt. Then they can go after them, but they won't go after a spouse because that spouse is married to somebody with debt.
But here's what can happen, right? So let's say, heaven forbid, a partner in a business dies and there is no proper planning within their documents that describes what happens next and how that family of the dead partner is now properly compensated.
Right.
In that scenario, the spouse becomes the partner. So I ask my business owners, you know, Sam is your partner. Is his wife able to run the business the same way he could? Because if the answer is no, what are people doing? Not properly funding, you know, their businesses in a way that can compensate the spouse and have that company move on. Because we're all people. Yes, we have business entities around us, but we're all going to die one day. We don't know when, we don't know how. So we have to start protecting ourselves much better.
And that's a good point that Natalie makes as far as protection. If this business partner dies, there should be an insurance policy or something that buys out the partner's wife or family from the business so that surviving partner can have can run the business properly. But the part of the problem is just poor planning. There's just not planning when it comes into going into the business, and there's an expense involved, and many times the partners are not thinking about these issues, but it's like a family, and you have to, as if you're planning for your own death and what happens to your children and your assets when you pass away, you have to do the same in your business. Is there a proper power of attorney set up? Is there a proper insurance? What happens with the debts? Let's say that one partner who died had all the debts in their name. When you come to me in those circumstances, I might be able to get those debts wiped away where the business doesn't have to pay for that. But many cases, the business owners don't really realize that, and they start to use their assets to pay for the decedent's debts when that's not even necessary. So, understanding not only the planning, but what happens with debt in the event of death is really important. Death or divorce, if the matter falls apart.
What if there's debt? What if there's company debt and the business partners break up and there's a falling out, which happens all the time? What happens to the company debt in that scenario?
Well, they often end up in litigation, but the corporate debt is personally guaranteed by somebody. So either both partners or multiple partners have guaranteed the debt, especially in lines of credit and loans, or in credit cards, it's in somebody's name. A corporate credit card is still guaranteed by an individual. It is not just in a corporate name and disappears, because otherwise you could just dissipate corporations and that would be the end of the debts. Right. So somebody's responsible for that. But the truth is that becomes a litigation issue. Partners fall apart and they haven't properly worked through that issue ahead of time, then the bottom line is it's going to end up in litigation. So planning ahead of time to determine what happens in the event, it's like a prenuptial agreement. Determine what happens ahead of time with your business should you end up with debt. Who's going to be responsible for that upon death or dissipation of the business? But otherwise, you're going to end up here with both of the parties, just like they do in divorce, and then we'll renegotiate the debts that are there so that we can get rid of them for less than what's owed and save whatever assets are left in that business.
And are the two of you, if you get to somebody early and you're able to do some pre-planning, are you taking them through a sort of a blueprint process? Is there some sort of a review that you do that you take everybody through? How does that work?
Basically, if a person comes early enough, okay, they could build $1 billion business and have that completely outside of their estate, free from creditors, etc. Here's the problem, though. It's the chicken and egg situation. Lots of people want that protection, don't know that they need it, and frankly, in the beginnings of a business, don't necessarily want to pay for it because they say, well, let's see how the business does. At which point they then take on these issues, they have a partnership that doesn't work, they then get into some bad debt, and now we have a real problem. So what I would say is, yes, with the right legal team in place, people like Leslie, like me, like, Barth Calderon, people like that who actually take care of the business owner and who are cognizant of the fact that maybe that person doesn't have, this kind of money to spend on the planning today, but we're going to do baby steps to get them there. Right. That, I think, is the way for lawyers to think. But unfortunately, so many of our brethren don't think that way and just want to sue.
Right. And I actually have a scenario where I have two partners who are coming to me. They're preparing all their documents right now because it's really complex. And they're trying to figure out, when they resolve the debt, what's going to happen to their spouses and the cash flow and the issues with the loans that they have. When you start to resolve debt, you start to become overwhelmed and there's not enough cash flow to pay for that. There are a lot of other scenarios that have to be considered. It's really not black and white and easy. And I would suggest strongly that, that it become part of a business plan, that you check in regularly with a financial attorney to say, hey, are we on the right track here? Are we making the right decisions? Have we set things up properly to avoid issues in the future? No one likes to think about what happens in the worst case scenarios, but that's why there's insurance. That's why people like Natalie and myself are around to help those who are building businesses and building fortunes, to help them resolve it, not just after the fact. But again, the reality is that it's just not top of mind. Nobody goes into signing any kind of loan thinking that they're going to default. They're thinking, if I could just have this cash flow, then I can do this, this, and this with my business, and therefore I'll be good. But that's just not the right thinking. And I can tell you 8 out of 10 times that's just not going to work. Or if they could just get the next loan, and they're willing to sign for loans that don't make sense financially for themselves, their businesses, their assets, just to try to get ahead. And it's somewhat an act of desperation, but it's just not good thinking. And if you could get somebody like myself on the outside to help you see things a little bit more clearly, what to expect down the road should this not work out, then you'll be in a much better situation. I mean, it's the same thing with the student loans. What happens if you get to your 4th year and you can't take out the money? What happens if you get to graduate school and you can't take the money out? You know, and I've had somebody who went through 5 semesters of school and couldn't finish up. So it happens. And it's the same thing with loans and businesses. Sometimes you need X amount of dollars, but once that's used up, you change your financial situation, your credit. When you start to change your credit scenario and you have too much outstanding debt, then you are not going to get any more loans. And that credit piece and understanding how to set things up right from the beginning, credit-wise, should everything be in both partners' names or both spouses' names? You know, who should have their names on the accounts? Who should be the signers? Who should take on the credit card debt? Who should take on the car loans or the lines of credit? Those are things to consider. And very often everyone's like, well, just do it together. We'll just do it together as couples. We'll do it together as business partners. And that's not necessarily the best way to do it.
What I'm hearing Leslie say is, ladies, make sure it's in your husband's name because we're more likely to survive.
What I would say, though, is ladies, make sure you understand what's going on. And that spouses or significant others, I mean, it is more often, unfortunately, the ladies who know less, especially in business situations, if they have a husband who's in business. And that does happen in not so much in the younger generation, but in the older generations. It's really not uncommon. It's not a stereotype or it's not discriminatory. It's really a fact that most women who are older than 50 are generally not involved in their spouse's businesses. They just go off of whatever they're being told, and they really don't have a grip on what's going on. And it's not a bad idea to at least understand a little bit about the business and understand about how the personal finances work, because I do see situations where people are really blindsided upon death or disability of people's situations. They say, oh, I thought everything was great. I thought my husband's business was doing well. And again, we use the terms, it's mostly women, because in fact it is. And that's unfortunate.
And I would say too, you know, every time that I have heard someone say, well, he told me that I'd be taken care of, run as fast as you can to your lawyer and figure out what the hell is going on, because I cannot tell you how many people have then realized, oh my God, we're not legally married, and now his sister in Poland is going to be the owner of where I live. Or, oh my God, I wasn't the beneficiary on that policy, and his ex-fiance is, and now is taking the money.
Or the children from a previous marriage. So that happens in many secondary situations. There's often a lot of debt after divorce, and there's all kinds of complications when marriages break up. So that is something to consider as well, especially wealthy people who say, you know, my husband said I was going to be taken care of. And I agree with Natalie. You need to understand, what does that mean? I appreciate that you're telling me that I'm going to be taken care of, but what really does that mean? Right. Does that mean there's a life insurance policy? Where is the life insurance policy? How much is the policy worth? Who holds it? Who do I go to if you pass away? How much is it? You know, is it, you know, what's happening with your pension? What's happening with your business debts? Are they going to impact me and my house? You know, I have had situations where houses are deeded in the wrong names. Always. Or they just don't know all kinds of scenarios. So you want to make sure that you understand what's happening. And it does require a lot of questioning. And I do understand that many times you get brushed off and said, it's fine, why are you bothering me with this? I told you I took care of it. But you need to call somebody to task and really understand. And that goes with partners too, because partners will do that too in business scenarios. They'll say, I got this, I took care of it. Right. And you, okay, I trust you. But the truth is, what does that really mean? You know, looking at your credit reports, as a business owners, you should be looking at each other's credit reports and seeing what's there. As spouses, you should be looking at credit reports. You should have a file with every single thing that's being paid, every single policy, every single document that should be someplace that's accessible, both in business situations and personal situations.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, it's that scenario of unintended consequences. And I often think of that story that I read Marilyn Monroe, you know, the dress that she wore when she sang happy birthday to JFK? Her planning was screwed up. That dress ended up with the child of a former husband of hers. I think she was married 4 times. And that child then like put the dress on eBay and sold it for like $50 or something. I mean, unintended consequences, right?
Happens all the time.
And let me tell you the unintended consequences with debt. Tons and tons of debt that you just don't know about. And I could tell you that I have spouses, male and female, where their other spouse does not know that they're working with me, that they have tremendous amounts of debt and I'm working through it and the spouse doesn't know.
Really?
So it's not uncommon.
Which brings up the question of, there's a lot of gray divorce today, and then second marriages where people are entering the marriages with considerable assets, businesses, stocks, bonds, and cash property. How does debt and how does planning, Natalie, play into that when you're moving into another marriage where you've got all these assets? Is that a big deal?
It's a must. I mean, you cannot go into a marriage, whether it's first or second or fifth, without knowing what's under the cover. I mean, we test drive cars and learn about the cars we drive, and it's only for a 3-year lease. More so than we do the preparation and the planning and the talking to our spouse about what the hell to expect. And here's why I think it's awkward.
Right.
Who wants to have that conversation? But I think with professionals such as all of us today on the call, we are building a space to make it okay, that they can blame us. Well, Natalie's the one asking the question. Leslie's the one asking the question, as opposed to it being direct hand-to-hand combat. And I think that makes a big difference, because I'll tell you, when it's coming from the professional, it sounds different than when it's coming from your spouse who wants to know how much money is there, because I get it. It's why a lot of people don't do prenups. They know that divorce is 50% likely, but it's not going to happen to them if they think.
Right.
So,
or they look at that prenup as something that's, a tool for really a contentious tool, but it's really not. I mean, I'm in a second marriage, so I can tell you that you would be a fool if you didn't have a prenuptial agreement. When you have assets, and you have children from previous marriages. I mean, and not understanding what the other situation is. I mean, you can ask a lot of questions, but sometimes the answers, sometimes they're not always forthright with the answers, and that becomes problematic. And you really have to be aware of how entrenched do you want to get with somebody who has a lot of baggage financially. And there's nothing wrong with keeping finances separate, young or older, and not mixing them when there's a lot of complexities, when you have a complex business and you have other situations. So I'm not against I'm certainly very pro planning, and that includes prenuptial agreements, and I am very postnuptial agreements, understanding where the assets are, who's doing what, who's paying for what, having that open conversation, being really out, everything should be out on the table. There should be no secrets financially in any kind of partnership. And as soon as that happens, that's a huge red flag, and it really burdens the trust in the relationship.
Listen, we're getting right up here against the window. I want to just say thank you to both of you. I mean, I could have this discussion for another 4 hours. Your stuff is really, really great. And what I always say to the audience members who are watching this, Wealth Protector TV, is if anybody wants to get one-on-one with either of these ladies, learn more about, the planning, then we're going to send out a follow-up email. Look for that. We'll give you a way to connect with them. But awesome information, and thanks so much for jumping on the show, both of you.
thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.